In 1971, a quiet, awkward corporate lawyer was handed the keys to a failing company. No charisma, no Harvard MBA, no grand vision speech. He had just been diagnosed with throat cancer and told the board he planned to keep working anyway. The board wasn't sure what to do with him. 20 years later, under his leadership, that company had become the #1 consumer paper products company on the entire planet. It had outperformed Procter & Gamble. It had crushed Scott Paper. It had turned every dollar invested into $42 returned. And almost nobody knew his name. That man was Darwin Smith, and his story is the first clue to one of the most counterintuitive discoveries in the history of business research. Because here is what we are told greatness looks like: bold, loud, charismatic, visionary. We are told great leaders fill rooms, make headlines, and build cults of personality around themselves. But Jim Collins spent 5 years, 5 full years, with a team of researchers analyzing over 1,400 companies across 4 decades of data, 6,000 articles, 2,000 pages of interview transcripts, and when they finally found the 11 companies that had made the leap from average to truly extraordinary and sustained that leap for 15 years or more, every single one of them was led by someone you probably cannot name. That is not a coincidence. That is the first lesson of Good to Great, and it is going to completely change how you think about leadership, strategy, and what it actually takes to build something that lasts. Welcome to Book Decoded. Today, we are breaking down Good to Great by Jim Collins, one of the most rigorously researched, most cited, most genuinely useful business books ever written. This is not a feel-good book. There are no affirmations here, no morning routines, no hustle culture motivational quotes. This is a book built on data, on evidence, on 5 years of obsessive research designed to answer one question that should matter to every leader, every entrepreneur, every professional in America. What actually separates companies that become truly great from the ones that stay permanently average? The answer is not what you expect, and by the end of this video, you will have a framework so clear and so practical that you will immediately start seeing it everywhere, in your industry, your organization, and your own career. 7 findings. Let's go. Before we get to the 7 findings, we need to sit with the single most important sentence in this entire book. Good is the enemy of great. Read that again. Not failure, not incompetence, not bad strategy. Good. Here is the trap. Most companies reach a point where they are profitable, respected, and stable. The numbers are fine, the culture is decent, nobody is panicking. And that comfort, that perfectly acceptable goodness, becomes the ceiling they never break through. Because when things are good enough, there is no urgency to become great. There is no pain forcing change. There is no crisis demanding innovation. There is just the slow, comfortable drift of an organization that has stopped asking whether it could be something genuinely extraordinary. Collins makes this personal, too. Most people never build extraordinary careers because they build acceptable ones. The salary is fine, the title is respectable, the work is okay. And every day of settling for okay is a day that great never gets a chance. This book is about the companies, and by extension the people, who refuse to accept good as the destination. Now, here's what they actually did differently. Finding number 1. And this one will genuinely shock you. Collins and his team expected to find that the great transformation companies were led by superstar CEOs, larger-than-life personalities, the kind of leader that gets profiled in Fortune and ends up on a TED stage. What they found was the exact opposite. Every single one of the 11 great companies was led during its transformation by what Collins calls a level 5 leader. Let him map this out. There are 5 levels of leadership capability. Level 1, the highly capable individual, someone who makes quality contributions through talent and hard work, good at their job, nothing more. Level 2, the contributing team member, someone who works effectively with a group towards shared objectives, a solid colleague. Level 3, the competent manager, someone who organizes people and resources toward efficient execution of a clear goal, a reliable operator. Level 4, the effective leader, someone who creates compelling vision and drives high performance. This is what most people think of when they say great leader. This is where Jack Welch lives, where Lee Iacocca lives. And then there is Level 5. Level 5 is different in kind, not just degree. The Level 5 leader builds enduring greatness through a paradoxical blend of 2 qualities that American culture almost never puts in the same sentence: personal humility and professional will. Personal humility means these leaders give credit to their teams, their colleagues, and even luck when things go right. They look out the window and find reasons to attribute success to everyone except themselves. But when things go wrong, they look in the mirror. They take personal responsibility. They do not blame the market, the economy, the competition, or their team. They own it. Professional will means they are ferociously, relentlessly committed to making their organization great. Not famous, not personally powerful, not wealthy, great. And that commitment does not waver, does not fade, and does not negotiate. Now here is the tension that makes this so hard to apply. These are not the qualities that get promoted in most American organizations. We promote the Level 4 leaders, the bold, charismatic vision casters who generate excitement and command rooms. We put them on magazine covers. We write books about their genius. And Collins found that those leaders, the ones with the biggest personalities and the loudest visions, were actually more likely to produce short-term spikes followed by long-term decline than to produce sustained greatness. Why? Because Level 4 leaders tend to build organizations that depend on them. Their energy, their direction, their genius keeps the machine running, and when they leave, the machine slows down. Finding number 1, and this one will genuinely shock you. Collins and his team expected to find that the great transformation companies were led by superstar CEOs, larger-than-life personalities, the kind of leader that gets profiled in Fortune and ends up on a TED stage. What they found was the exact opposite. Every single one of the 11 great companies was led during its transformation by what Collins calls a Level 5 leader. Let him map this out. There are 5 levels of leadership capability. Level 1, the highly capable individual, someone who makes quality contributions through talent and hard work, good at their job, nothing more. Level 2, the contributing team member, someone who works effectively with a group towards shared objectives, a solid colleague. Level 3, the competent manager, someone who organizes people and resources toward efficient execution of a clear goal, a reliable operator. Level 4, the effective leader, someone who creates compelling vision and drives high performance. This is what most people think of when they say great leader. This is where Jack Welch lives, where Lee Iacocca lives. And then there is Level 5. Level 5 is different in kind, not just degree. The Level 5 leader builds enduring greatness through a paradoxical blend of 2 qualities that American culture almost never puts in the same sentence: personal humility and professional will. Personal humility means these leaders give credit to their teams, their colleagues, and even luck when things go right. They look out the window and find reasons to attribute success to everyone except themselves. But when things go wrong, they look in the mirror. They take personal responsibility.
They do not blame the market, the economy, the competition, or their team. They own it. Professional will means they are ferociously, relentlessly committed to making their organization great. Not famous, not personally powerful, not wealthy, great. And that commitment does not waver, does not fade, and does not negotiate. Now here is the tension that makes this so hard to apply. These are not the qualities that get promoted in most American organizations. We promote the Level 4 leaders, the bold, charismatic vision casters who generate excitement and command rooms. We put them on magazine covers. We write books about their genius. And Collins found that those leaders, the ones with the biggest personalities and the loudest visions, were actually more likely to produce short-term spikes followed by long-term decline than to produce sustained greatness. Why? Because Level 4 leaders tend to build organizations that depend on them. Their energy, their direction, their genius keeps the machine running, and when they leave, the machine slows down.
Level 5 leaders build organizations that are stronger after they leave than while they were there. They set up successors to exceed them. They embed the mission so deeply into the culture that no single person's departure can derail it. Go back to Darwin Smith at Kimberly-Clark. When he took over in 1971, the company was a struggling paper mill business. The stock had underperformed the general market for 20 years. Smart people on Wall Street had written it off. Smith made a decision in his first years as CEO that the Wall Street Journal called bizarre. He decided that the company's core business, coated paper for magazines, had no path to greatness, so he sold the mills, all of them, including the ones in the company's home state of Wisconsin that had been there for over a century. Then he took all the proceeds and went all in on consumer paper products, competing directly against Procter & Gamble and Scott Paper, two of the most powerful consumer brands in the world. His board was skeptical, the press was skeptical, the analysts were skeptical. Smith did not hold a press conference to defend his vision. He did not give inspirational speeches about disrupting the industry. He just kept working, quietly, persistently, focused completely on making the right decisions for the long-term health of the company, rather than managing perception in the short term. 20 years later, Kimberly-Clark owned Scott Paper, and it had beaten Procter & Gamble across almost every product category it competed in. When journalists asked Smith about his management philosophy and leadership style, his answer was 5 words: "I never stopped trying to become qualified for the job." That is Level 5 leadership. Not confidence, not charisma, humility and will combined.
Section 3. First who, then what? Finding number 2, and this one directly contradicts what most business schools teach. Here is the conventional model for building a great organization. Step 1, set the vision. Decide where you are going. Develop the strategy. Build the roadmap. Then step 2, get the right people and align them behind that vision. Vision first, people second. Collins found the great companies did the opposite. They obsessed over who before they worried about what. Before the strategy was locked in, before the vision was fully formed, before the direction was set, the leaders of these companies were laser-focused on getting the right people into the organization and the wrong people out. Now, why does this matter so much? Think about it from a practical standpoint. If you build your strategy first and then hire people to execute it, you have created a fragile system. The moment the strategy needs to change, and it always needs to change, you have a problem. The people you hired were built for the old plan. Now you have to convince them, manage them, incentivize them, and maybe eventually replace them. But if you start by getting the right people, people who share your values, your intellectual curiosity, your commitment to excellence, then the strategy can evolve without crisis, because the right people will figure out the new direction together. The right people don't need to be managed toward excellence. They hold themselves to excellence. They don't need to be motivated. They are intrinsically driven. The bus can go almost anywhere if the right people are on it. Collins gives 3 specific rules that the great companies followed.
Rule 1. When in doubt, do not hire. Keep looking. An empty seat does less damage than the wrong person in it. The great companies were almost ruthless about maintaining a high threshold for who got on the bus. Rule 2. When you know you have the wrong person, act. Do not hold on out of kindness or optimism or the hope that they will improve. The great leaders moved quickly, and Collins found that in almost every case, both the company and the individual were better off when the decision was made decisively. Rule 3. Put your best people on your biggest opportunities, not your biggest problems. This is counterintuitive. Most organizations default to assigning their strongest players to fix what's broken. The great companies pointed their best talent at what could be extraordinary. Here is the implication that should hit you personally. Most people spend enormous energy trying to develop a perfect strategy for their career, their business, or their team, and not nearly enough energy thinking about who they are building it with. The strategy matters, but the people matter more. The wrong people with a brilliant strategy will find a way to fail. The right people with an average strategy will find a way to win.
Finding number 3. And this is the one that separates real leaders from the ones who just play the part. Collins calls it the Stockdale paradox. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Admiral James Stockdale was the highest-ranking U.S. military officer held as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. He spent over 7 years at the Hanoi Hilton, one of the most brutal POW camps in American military history. He was tortured more than 20 times. He had no release date. He had no guarantee of survival. Collins met Stockdale years after his release and asked him directly, who didn't make it out? Stockdale answered without hesitation, the optimists. Collins was stunned. He pushed for clarification. Stockdale explained, the optimists were the ones who told themselves they would be out by Christmas. When Christmas came and passed, they pushed it to Easter, then Thanksgiving, then Christmas again, and eventually, Stockdale's words, they died of a broken heart. The optimists weren't weak, they weren't cowards. They died because they could not reconcile the gap between their expectations and their reality. The repeated disappointment broke something in them. Stockdale survived by doing 2 things simultaneously that seem like opposites. He maintained absolute, unshakable faith that he would get out, that he would survive, that the experience would ultimately define him in a positive way. And at the same time, he never allowed himself to ignore the brutal facts of his current situation. He knew exactly how bad things were. He did not manufacture comfort. He did not suppress reality. He looked directly at how hard it was and kept going anyway. Faith in the outcome, honesty about the present. That is the Stockdale paradox, and Collins found it alive in every single great company he studied. The leaders of these organizations were not relentlessly positive. They did not run cultures of manufactured enthusiasm. They did not punish people for bringing bad news. They did not suppress data that contradicted their assumptions. They created environments where the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, could travel freely through the organization. Collins identifies 4 specific practices that made this possible. First, lead with questions, not answers. The great leaders were genuinely curious about what was true. They were not walking into rooms to confirm what they already believed. They were walking in to find out what was actually happening. Second, engage in dialogue and debate, not coercion.
The great companies had cultures where disagreement was not just tolerated, it was expected, where smart people with different perspectives challenged each other openly, because they were all trying to find the right answer rather than win a political argument. Third, conduct autopsies without blame. When things went wrong, the great companies analyzed the failure honestly. What happened? Why did it happen? What did we learn? Without turning the debrief into a political event designed to protect someone's position. Fourth, build red flag mechanisms. Create specific ways for information to move upward without being filtered, softened, or lost. The great leaders understood that by the time bad news reached the top of a hierarchy through multiple layers of people who each softened it slightly to protect themselves, it often arrived too late or too diluted to act on. Here is the hard truth this principle forces. Most organizations do not actually want to confront brutal facts. They want to feel good about where they are. They want leaders who project confidence and certainty. They punish people who raise uncomfortable questions. They promote optimists and marginalize skeptics. And then they wonder why they keep getting blindsided. Reality is your greatest strategic asset, but only if you are willing to look directly at it.
Finding number 4, and this is the one people talk about for the rest of their lives. It begins with an ancient Greek parable. The philosopher Archilochus wrote, "The fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing." The fox is clever, adaptive, multi-talented. It approaches the hedgehog from dozens of different angles, sneaking, rushing, feinting left, cutting right. It has a new strategy every single day. The hedgehog does one thing. Every time the fox attacks, the hedgehog curls into a perfect ball of spikes. It doesn't matter what angle the fox comes from. It doesn't matter how sophisticated the fox's strategy is. The hedgehog's one thing defeats everything the fox has. Collins uses this as the foundation of his most famous framework, a model he calls the Hedgehog Concept. It is built around 3 circles, and the intersection of all 3 is where greatness lives. Circle 1. What can you be the best in the world at? Not what you're currently doing, not what you want to be good at, not where you've already invested years of energy. What could your organization, if it focused everything, be genuinely, legitimately the best in the world at? This is harder than it sounds, and here is why. Most companies confuse core competency with the potential for world-class excellence. You can be competent at many things. You can be the best in the world at very few. And the brutal honesty required to separate those two is something most leaders avoid. Circle 2. What drives your economic engine? Every great company found a single economic denominator, Collins calls it profit per X, that had the most impact on their long-term financial strength, and they focused relentlessly on improving that one number. For Walgreens, the insight was profit per customer visit. Once they locked on to that denominator, everything changed. Store locations, layout, staffing, inventory. Every decision ran through the filter of, does this improve what we generate from each customer interaction? It sounds almost too simple. That's the point. Most organizations have dozens of financial metrics they're trying to optimize simultaneously. Great companies find the one that matters most and build everything around it. Circle 3. What are you deeply passionate about? Not what looks good in a press release, not what sounds strategic in a board meeting. What does your organization, at its best, in its most energized and committed moments, actually care about? The Hedgehog Concept is where all 3 circles overlap, the place where what you can be best at, what drives your economics, and what genuinely excites your people
all converge into a single clear answer. And here is what that clarity does. It makes almost every decision easy. When a new opportunity comes along, do we expand into this market? Do we launch this product? Do we pursue this partnership? Instead of running complex analysis, you ask one question: does this fit inside the 3 circles? If yes, pursue it aggressively. If no, walk away, no matter how attractive it looks. Collins found that the great companies were almost extreme in their willingness to walk away from profitable opportunities that fell outside the hedgehog concept. They understood that focus is not a limitation, focus is the weapon. One more thing about this concept that most people miss: it is not a goal, it is not a vision, it is not a strategic plan. It is a deep understanding, arrived at through honest reflection and often years of dialogue, of what you genuinely should be doing. And that understanding, once clear, becomes the organizing principle for everything else. The great companies averaged 4 years of internal dialogue and debate before their hedgehog concept crystallized. 4 years. That is not slowness. That is the discipline of getting the most important question right before building everything on top of it.
Finding number 5. And this one carries a warning. When most people hear the phrase culture of discipline, they picture rigid rules, bureaucracy, tight management controls, a system where everyone follows the procedures and nobody colors outside the lines. That is not what Collins means. That is almost the opposite of what he means. The great companies had discipline without bureaucracy. Here's the distinction. Bureaucracy exists to manage and constrain people who cannot be trusted to make good decisions on their own. When you have the wrong people in an organization, people who don't share the values, who don't hold themselves to high standards, who need to be managed toward acceptable performance, you need rules and controls to compensate for the human deficiency. But when you have the right people, people who are intrinsically disciplined, who take personal accountability seriously, who hold themselves to a standard higher than any external requirement could impose, you don't need bureaucracy. You need freedom. And you need the discipline to stay within the hedgehog concept. The great companies gave their right people enormous autonomy. They trusted them to make good decisions. They did not drown them in approval processes and oversight mechanisms. But they were absolutely unyielding about one thing: staying focused. Here is where the discipline actually lived. The great companies said no to good opportunities constantly, relentlessly, almost aggressively. An acquisition that would have been profitable but fell outside the 3 circles passed. A new market that looked attractive but required capabilities outside what the company could be best in the world at passed. A partnership that came with significant revenue but didn't fit the economic engine passed. This discipline is genuinely hard to maintain, because the alternative, saying yes to good-looking opportunities, chasing attractive adjacencies, expanding because expansion feels like growth, is what most organizations do, and it feels like progress. It looks like ambition. But Collins found that every time a great company violated the discipline of staying inside the hedgehog concept, performance declined. And every time a comparison company that had been doing well started saying yes to everything, their period of strength ended. The stop doing list, Collins argues, is as important as the to-do list, maybe more important. And at the individual level, this is one of the most personally useful frameworks in the book. Where in your career, your business, or your life are you saying yes to things that feel productive, but are actually pulling you away from the intersection of what you're best at, what drives your results, and what genuinely energizes you? That is where the discipline lives.
not in following rules, in protecting your focus.